And this is 45% of the panel believes that Ben Simmons will be in Philadelphia at the start of the season, which I guess matches up with the 45% that doesn't think the Sixers will have the most drama. But 45% thinks he'll be in Philly, 15% apiece, or 15% think he'll be in Portland, 15% think he'll be in Sacramento. So that's tied for second. The Timberwolves are the next team listed. So the fourth team on the list, 10%, which I apparently is 2 votes. So 45% still with the Sixers, 15% for Portland, 15% with the Kings, the Wolves at 10%, and then 5% apiece for the Bulls, the Orlando Magic, and the New Orleans Pelicans, which are teams that have been kind of mentioned on the fringes of the trade conversation, although I haven't heard a whole lot of Magic talk recently, or Pelicans for that matter. But the Timberwolves rank 4th on this list. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a problem with the team turnaround thing. That makes sense. The team turmoil doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. The Simmons odds, that checks out as well. I don't know that I'd put the Kings ahead of the Wolves. The only really leg up they seem to have is that they're in California, but ultimately it doesn't matter whether or not he gets traded to California. It's up to Daryl Morey where he gets traded. And I don't think the Kings can offer that much better or more appealing of a package, or that they're going to be any more likely to pull in a third team than the Timberwolves. So I don't see him in Sacramento with the Kings this year. But I understand why they're on the list because of the California thing. So anyway, interesting article. If you have the opportunity to go check that out on ESPN Plus, but there's several Wolves mentions throughout. Okay. Next, I want to dive back into the Robert Covington trade of I don't know, what was it? February of 2020, and really kind of play out each thread from this trade, which players are still with the Wolves, which players are still or are not with the teams that they were traded to on that day in that 4-team trade, and look at what that means for the Timberwolves today. What are the remaining pieces from that trade, et cetera. So we're going to dive into that next. First, though, let's talk about our friends at Sweatblock. There's a few things in life that simply are not fun to talk about, and one of them is excessive sweating. You know what I mean? When you're sweating through your shirts for no reason, it's definitely embarrassing. When you public speak, important speech of any kind, an interview, a first date, whatever it might be, if you don't want to worry about it, you got to use Sweatblock antiperspirant wipes. I just started using them. They are amazing. Sweatblock is stronger and more effective than most clinical antiperspirants. You can simply apply them at night before bedtime, go to bed. The next morning, you'll wake up, wash, and go about your day without worrying about sweat. Guaranteed. And I know it sounds too good to be true, but you literally only have to use Sweatblock once, maybe twice a week, and it keeps you dry the entire time. No more pitting out, no more picking your shirt based on which one will hide sweat better. It's doctor created and doctor recommended. It works for up to 7 days per use. There's a dry shirt guarantee. If Sweatblock doesn't keep you dry, you'll get your money back. It's been featured and tested on the Rachel Ray Show by firefighters, and it's been a bestseller on Amazon for the past 10 years with over 13,000 reviews. And right now, today, it is currently number 1 in Amazon's antiperspirant category. You can wear whatever you want to wear. It will be your little secret to confidence. It's a must-have for everyone's toiletry bag. If it's a big presentation, a hot date, a speech, an interview, everyone can benefit from this product. If you or someone you love is dealing with this issue, you have to check out Sweatblock. Get it today for 20% off at sweatblock.com with the promo code LOCKEDON, or at Amazon and CVS. But again, sweatblock.com, promo code LOCKEDON for 20% off today. Let's also talk about DirecTV. Does this sound familiar? You've got a device that lets you catch the game live, another one that lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching sports highlights on your phone, etc. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment that you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes and no need to buy another device ever again. The best part is that there's no annual contract. Get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. All right, let's talk about the Covington trade from February of 2020. So we're a good 17 and a half months now past this deal. And the deal itself, let's just quickly talk about the Wolves components of the deal. We don't need to get into exactly everything that the Hawks and the Rockets are up to as part of this deal, but the Wolves and the Nuggets were the main 2 players here. And trust me, this isn't just a rehash of like, oh yeah, they still have Malik Beasley on the team. Let's pull each of these threads and see where they unravel to, right? If we follow each of these pieces from this deal, what are the Timberwolves sitting with today from this trade back on February 5th, 2020? So the Wolves traded out Robert Covington, Jordan Bell, Keita Bates-Diop, Shabazz Napier, and Noah Vonleh. They received back Malik Beasley, Juancho Hernangomez, Jared Vanderbilt, and Evan Turner in his expiring contract. Plus, they got the Hawks 2021 first-round pick, which ended up being number 17 in the 21 draft. In the 2020 draft. More on that in a second. So let's start by talking about where each of the players that the Wolves traded out, where they are now. Robert Covington, of course, went to Houston in this deal. Ultimately ended up going to Portland the following offseason. So he was a member of the Blazers all of last year and is with them again this year, the final year of that affordable contract he was on that he initially signed with the Sixers. The Wolves traded Jordan Bell. Jordan Bell was then shipped off to Memphis. He bounced to the Wizards, was on their G League team. Last year, he signed a two-way deal at the end of the season with the Warriors and played, I think, in one game with Golden State. So he's played in games for three different NBA franchises, Memphis, Washington, and Golden State since leaving the Wolves. He's currently not on a roster, so he's not on a roster at all. Keita Bates-Diop signed a two-way deal. He played briefly with the Nuggets in the bubble after the trade. He signed a two-way deal with the Spurs last year, and now this year just signed a 2-year, not fully guaranteed, a partially guaranteed deal with the Spurs. So he is on an NBA roster, but he's the only one besides Rocco that is. Shabazz Napier was flipped to the Wizards from Denver right after the trade. He's now playing overseas in Russia. Noah Vonleh was briefly with the Bulls last year, had COVID at the start of the season. He's now playing in China. So of all those guys, Rocco's on the Blazers, so different team than he was traded to. Bell's bounced around, is not on a roster. Bates-Diop is now with the Spurs. Napier and Vonleh are playing overseas. That's it. The Wolves didn't trade any picks as part of this deal either. Now, the players the Wolves got back, Turner, of course, the Wolves couldn't reach a buyout. His contract expired. He's out of the league. I think he's an assistant, maybe now with Portland, if I remember right. Jared Vanderbilt is still on the team. They've, of course, re-signed him now as a restricted free agent. I've talked on the show. Actually, I talked on the show. If you want to go back to March of 2020 and listen to my analysis of this deal, or February of 2020, I was a fan of getting Jared Vanderbilt in this trade. I think I did an entire show on why I thought the Keita Bates-Diop for Jared Vanderbilt component of this deal was so genius, and it was really underreported at the time. So that's a topic that I'm happy to talk about another day as well. Juancho Hernangomez, of course, no longer on the team. That he's maybe the messiest part of this deal because of the Wolves overpaying him in restricted free agency, then including him as part of a deal. He's now been flipped from Memphis to Boston this offseason. And then, of course, Malik Beasley, who's also been re-signed as a restricted free agent. So the Wolves have actually re-signed Beasley, Hernangomez, and Vanderbilt. So the three main parts of this trade, showing just how much they wanted to get those guys in Minnesota initially. So that's the first part of the deal, right? And so, on its face, yeah, it's good. Malik Beasley's, you could argue he's in a vacuum. I'd still say Robert Covington's the better player, but Beasley has the most value of anybody in this trade because he's still got now 3 years left on his deal, 2 guaranteed deals, 3 years total. Covington's only got 1 year. Beasley's 6 years younger than Robert Covington. And yeah, Covington is a better defender, both as a one-on-one defender and as part of a team concept. He's also a better rebounder. He can play the 3 and the 4, can, guard multiple positions, really 3 positions, the 2, the 3, and the 4, depending on matchups. Whereas Beasley is pretty much locked into being a shooting guard. He's a 2-guard through and through. But again, 6 years younger, more team control. He's a better shooter. Rocco's a very good 3-point shooter, more of a volume guy. Beasley, and great range, obviously, on his 3-point shot, but Beasley's a more efficient scorer and also is a scorer. Covington's not a scorer. He's a guy who can shoot the 3, but he's much more of a 3-and-D type guy, and a team defender, and a good rebounder when he's at the small forward position. Those are his pros, right? So in a vacuum, you could argue Rocco's a better player, but the overall value of Malik Beasley at this stage is higher than that of Covington. And of course, Vanderbilt would be the next most valuable player in this deal besides those two. And he's now back with the Wolves for the next 3 seasons based on that contract he signed last week. So the other thing the Wolves got back was that draft pick, the number 17 pick in the 2020 draft. It was the Hawks pick initially. And on draft night, the Timberwolves traded pick number 17 and the 50th pick of the draft and a pair of future second-round picks, plus James Johnson and his expiring contract, to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Ricky Rubio, who had been acquired that night from Phoenix in the Chris Paul trade. And they got back Rubio and the 25 and 28 selection. Okay, so quickly, the Wolves sent out 17, 50, and 2 future second-rounders for 25 and 28 and swapped James Johnson for Ricky Rubio. So they picked up an extra year of salary, Rubio's contract. They picked up an extra first-round pick and sent out, and fell back in the first round. They traded back into excuse me, they traded backwards from 17 to 25, picked up number 28, and also shipped out some second rounders. The Thunder then picked Alexei Pokashevsky at number 17. And of course, he was promising, had a promising rookie year, bounced between the NBA and the G League. And, I mean, he wasn't good, but there's a lot to like about Alexei Pokashevsky, and I liked him a lot as a prospect. So then when it got during the draft last year, it got to number 23. The Timberwolves traded from up from 25 to get Leandro Bolmaro at number 23. So the Wolves did give up asset management at the time. It didn't look great. Trading the number 33 pick simply to move up 2 spots from 25 to 23 to get Bolmaro. But Bolmaro had slid a little bit, was at one point thought of a borderline, lottery prospect. And for the Wolves to get him at 23, they were excited about that. So they traded pick number 33 to get him at 23. And then the Wolves stayed at 28, which was the other pick they got from the Thunder in the James Johnson, the Rubio trade. And they took Jaden McDaniels, who, of course, former 5-star high school recruit, was thought to be a lottery selection, maybe a top 10 guy as recently as 12 months ago, the start of last college basketball season. So what the Wolves did on draft night, essentially then, put simply, is they traded number 17 and 4 second-round picks and James Johnson to get Ricky Rubio, Jaden McDaniels, and Leandro Bolmaro. Or you could say it this way. They traded Pokashevsky, 4 second-round picks, and James Johnson for Ricky Rubio, Jaden McDaniels, Leandro Bolmaro. The Wolves then turned around this offseason and traded Rubio to Cleveland for Taurean Prince and a second-round pick next year. And so I know that's complicated, but I'll play this thing out even further here in a minute. I want to talk a little bit about Juancho too. We can look at overall what the asset management looks like, what the Timberwolves did get back when this is all said and done as part of this deal. So we'll do that next. First, though, let's talk about our new friends over at Sleeper. In 2018, the fantasy sports experts at Sleeper realized that fantasy basketball was broken. Games were being won and lost based on whose players had more scheduled games that week. It made no sense and required very little strategy. So in 2020, Sleeper released a brand new way of playing fantasy basketball. It's called Game Pick, and it's only available on Sleeper. In Game Pick, owners pick a single game per week for each starter to count towards their team's total score, ensuring an even number of games played between opponents. The days of losing because your opponent's players simply had more scheduled games to play in that week are over. The days of mindless daily busy work are also over. The days of giving up halfway through the season because of the busy work, they're over as well. In Game Picks, you pick one game per week for each player based on player matchups, home versus away, opponent defensive ranking, pace of play, and on and on. All that adds up to more strategy and less busy work. Whether you prefer redraft, keeper, or dynasty, Game Picks has you covered. Sleeper cracked the fantasy basketball code. If you love playing fantasy football, if you prefer building out a weekly strategy versus daily busy work, you're going to love Game Picks. Download the Sleeper app and start a league with your friends today. You will not be disappointed. Sleeper's one-of-a-kind Game Pick is the most strategic fantasy basketball experience in the industry. All right, check it out at Sleeper. Check out their app. It's fantastic. I actually have used Sleeper for fantasy football now for a couple of years, and it's great. So go check it out at Sleeper. Check out their app, and you will get a strategic fantasy basketball experience at Sleeper. Let's also talk about Theragun. Don't let the stress of daily life weigh on your body, whether you're an elite athlete or someone like myself who's just trying to make it through the day tension-free. Theragun can help. Theragun's the handheld percussive therapy device that releases your deepest muscle tension using a scientifically calibrated combo of depth, speed, and power, and it's as quiet as an electric toothbrush. The Gen 4 Theragun doesn't just feel good, it gets to the source of the pain by releasing tension using Theragun's signature percussive therapy. It goes 60% deeper, 60% deeper than vibration alone. Whether you want to treat your muscle tension from working out, an injury, or just simply the stresses of everyday life, there's no substitute for the Theragun Gen 4. The OLED screen and design make you feel like you're holding something from the future. Just go to their site and check it out. And the Theragun app learns from your behaviors and suggests guided routines. It's trusted by 250 professional sports teams like Real Madrid and elite athletes like Paul George, DeAndre Hopkins, Maria Sharapova, hundreds of thousands of customers, and more. You can try Theragun for 30 days, starting at only $199. Go to therabody.com/lockedon right now. Get your Gen 4 Theragun today. That's therabody.com/lockedon, therabody.com/lockedon. All right. Let's play out the rest of the Robert Covington trade thing and look at the beyond the draft pick, the Juancho Hernangomez piece, and then the totality of the deal and where we sit today here in September of 2021. So we talked about the about the number 17 pick. The Juancho thing's a little bit weird. The Juancho story, I think if you're watching or listening to this, you're probably pretty well versed in Juancho. But basically, the Wolves overpaid him for the idea of Juancho Hernangomez last offseason. There wasn't a whole lot in terms of power forwards on the market. The Wolves got him for basically 3 years, $21 million, with some non-guaranteed. The third year is actually not guaranteed at all. And then last season, he came to camp out of shape. He wasn't the only one. Had a rough start to the season, contracted COVID, had some minor injury issues towards the end of the season. And then, but Chris Finch talked him up a little bit. He had him briefly in Denver a few years ago. So he talked about how he knows what Juancho can do. He can rebound. He can play some team defense. He can shoot the three. And there was some hope that he'd be part of the rotation this year. And then he separated his shoulder practicing with Team Spain this offseason. And the Wolves did not clear him to play in the Olympics, according to the Wolves. He thought that they did. He went to the opening ceremonies in Spain, found out he wasn't going to be allowed to play by the Timberwolves doctors. And there was a dispute. In a matter of weeks, both Juancho and Ricky Rubio, his country-mate and former Timberwolves teammate, were both shipped off to different places. So now Hernangomez was traded to Memphis along with Jarrett Culver, and this is where it gets a little messy because, well, I'll get to Culver here in a second. So Juancho goes to Memphis. He eventually gets flipped in a trade to the Boston Celtics. So Juancho's now on the Boston Celtics, and Jarrett Culver is still with the Grizzlies. The reason that if we look at like the totality of these moves and where the Wolves sit today, Culver makes it messy because the Wolves gave up Dario Saric and the number 11 or 13 pick. I forget which one. I think it was the 11 pick to move up to number 6, to move up 5 spots to number 6 in the 2019 draft to draft Jarrett Culver. So the Wolves gave up assets to get Culver, and then they trade Culver and Hernangomez to Memphis in the deal that brought Patrick Beverley to Minnesota. So it's not super clean when we're looking at the overall grouping of assets and what the Wolves got back. So we can look at it both with and without the Hernangomez piece. So if we take Hernangomez out of the equation, the Timberwolves traded, ultimately, they traded out between the Robert Covington trade and now. We can draw a direct line to that trade. Robert Covington, James Johnson, the number 17 pick in last year's draft, which is Alexei Pokusevski, and 4 second-round picks were all traded out. What they got back, Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt, Jaden McDaniels, Leandro Bolmaro, Taurean Prince, and a second-round pick in next year's draft, a 2022 second-round pick. So out, Covington, James Johnson, Poku, 4 second-round picks in Beasley, Vanderbilt, McDaniels, Bolmaro, Prince, and a second-round pick. It's really hard to argue that the Wolves did not do well in this trade. If we want to add in the Hernangomez thing, they traded out Hernangomez, got in Beverley. Beverly's a better player than Hernangomez. I understand Culver is also included, so we can include that or not. And also, if you're saying to yourself, wait, they traded a bunch of other guys in that deal. I'm not counting Keita Bates-Diop. I'm not counting Shabazz Napier, Jordan Bell, Noah Vonleh. Those guys basically aren't in the league anymore. Bates-Diop may or may not make the Spurs roster this year. Napier, Bell, Vonleh, none of those guys are currently on an NBA roster. So it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this conversation. Those guys, the point here is the Wolves basically traded a bunch of unwanted assets, which I know sounds bad, but we're talking about these guys in terms of trade assets, plus Covington, and got all this stuff back, and then continue to churn these assets and churn the roster, which at times can be detrimental. And it's part of the reason the Wolves have probably struggled over the past year or two. Have basically always struggled, but especially the last couple of years. But now, I mean, sitting here, look at that list of guys they got back. Malik Beasley is going to start, most likely. Vanderbilt's probably a starter, and if he's not, McDaniels is. So you've got at least 2 starters on this year's opening night roster between Beasley, Vanderbilt, and McDaniels. At least 2 of those guys will start. Bolmaro is probably a starter by opening night next year. He'll be a rotation guy by the end of the season. Prince and Beverley are both going to be in the rotation, and a future second-round pick. It's really hard to say that the Wolves didn't win this trade. I mean, and obviously the Rockets are now in complete, and not because of this trade, but the Rockets are now probably the worst team in the league. And Covington's on the Portland Trailblazers, who probably aren't that much better than the Wolves sitting here today. I understand that they're still a playoff team and they've still got Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, but it's not like anybody else won this trade, right? So if you're picking a team to win it, you got to look at the Timberwolves. Obviously the Hawks went to the conference finals last year, but again, not strictly because of this trade. But if you're looking at assets out, assets in, this is a really good look at asset management, right? Trading out a guy. And remember, when the Wolves made this trade, they're a non-playoff team. trading a veteran in Covington, who at the time was 29-ish, 30, coming off of a couple of injuries. I think it was a meniscus recently before that, and dealing him plus a bunch of guys that weren't going to be on the team anyway, expiring contract guys who also aren't in the league now, and everything they got back. And obviously they had to pay to keep those restricted free agents. But they did. And those appear to be savvy moves, keeping Beasley and keeping, well, we don't know yet for sure about Jared Vanderbilt, but at the moment, it certainly looks like it was the right thing to do, is to trade for him and then re-sign him as a restricted free agent. So really good asset management by Gerson Rosas. We can talk about Jarrett Culver another day and how that pick was bad and argue over whether or not. I tend to think Rosas did the right thing by getting out while he could on the Culver contract and getting back a guy like Beverly while he could. Well, I recognize that Culver's a sunk cost. So did Gerson Rosas, and he pulled the trigger on a trade like that. So, we could go move by move and kind of quibble over some of these things, but it's really hard to argue that he didn't do well in this Covington trade. Now, if Beasley had played really poorly last year, or if he, gets into more legal trouble or plays poorly this year, whatever, sure. I mean, 12 months ago, everybody thought that the contract was going to be an overpay, but now it looks like a bargain. If he can stay on the floor, can stay healthy and stay out of trouble, the Beasley contract looks really good. And the Vanderbilt contract remains to be seen, but based on how he played last year and the growth that he's already showing as an NBA player, that looks good too. So generally speaking, this was just a really solid trade by Gerson Rosas 17 months ago, and we'll know a lot more after this season about this roster. And if the remade roster itself is genuinely better, it certainly appears to be. But this is kind of the trade that kicked it all off. This preceded by a day the D'Angelo Russell trade, and obviously the bigger moves that have come since then as well. The Anthony Edwards draft pick, etc. But this was the first big domino that Rosas toppled as president of basketball operations with the Timberwolves. So we'll look back on this at the end of the season, surely, and be able to have a slightly different view on it at that point in time. All right. That's all I have on the show today. We'll be back on Wednesday. This is the last week, by the way, that we're doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We're back to daily already next week. Training camp starts. Media day is upcoming. Training camp starts next week. Preseason games are in just a couple weeks. We're like less than a month away from regular season basketball, believe it or not. So get excited. I'm pumped. This is, again, last week of just 3 shows. So we'll be back on Wednesday with more Locked On Wolves. If you're not already following or subscribed to the podcast, please do so anywhere you listen. That includes iTunes, as well as, of course, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, YouTube now as well. Please subscribe on YouTube. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. I think I also forgot to mention Odyssey. So you can listen on the Odyssey app as well, the all-new Odyssey app. A reminder about Locked On NBA Mondays, to check that out, hosted by Josh Lloyd. And then also Locked On Bets. Betting on any sport doesn't have to be a guessing game if you listen to the new Locked On Bets podcast, hosted by your boy Q. And handicapping expert Lee Sterling. You can get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day. Follow the Locked On Bets podcast, brought to you by betonline.ag, wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. A reminder that Locked On Wolves is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.